Welcome to Lawyers Mutual Insurance Company's on-demand continuing education program. Today our topic is resilient thinking for lawyers. We're doing part 2 of a 2-part program on resilient thinking for lawyers. In part 1, we focused on taming negative emotions, and in this part we're going to talk about boosting positive emotions. And before I introduce myself, I just want to remind you that there are PDF materials available online, including my full bio. And you can download them at any time during the program. You just need to click the blue PDF download button. You can download the PDF material at any time, but I'm going to be referencing some of the activities and exercises during the program. So you might want to go ahead and download them now if you haven't done so already. So let me just briefly introduce myself. My name is Ann Brafford, and I know firsthand what it's like to be a busy lawyer challenged with all the stressors. I practiced law for about 18 years. I was an equity partner at a big law firm practicing employment litigation. I left the practice of law in 2014 to go back to school to learn about lawyer thriving, really helping individual lawyers and the profession as a whole live up to its best self. I'm now a doctoral student in positive organizational psychology at school here in Southern California, and my entire focus is on lawyer well-being, really helping us figure out how we can use science to help lawyers be their best. And the topic that we're going to talk about today, resilient thinking, our focus is on positive emotions. There's a number of ways that we can build up our resilience, and positive emotions is one that's absolutely essential, and it's also one that gets ignored and dismissed, especially in the legal profession. So as I mentioned that our focus is going to be on positive emotions, you might think, are you kidding me, Ann? And the problem with positive emotions and happiness in the legal profession is they've sort of gotten a bad name. That when people think about happiness, especially serious lawyers, they might think immediately of the yellow smiley face and the old trite sayings like, don't worry, just be happy. And if this is how you feel, I hope I can change your mind through the course of this session, but I will tell you, I get it. I felt the same way when I first started studying this area. I felt like, I was an intense, serious lawyer, and this was very serious business that I was going about, and felt like positive emotions didn't really have a big role to play. But what I have learned since then through my study of positive emotions is that I was really wrong. That positive emotions don't just affect the way that we feel, but it affects our neurological processes, our behaviors, how we think and perceive challenges. Positive emotions actually can transform challenges in a way that makes them seem more able for us to overcome. So positive emotions shouldn't be looked at like as a dessert that we can just dispense with. It really is a main course. So let's get started on the idea of what is resilience and how does positive emotions play a role. So I want to give you a framework to think about resilience. And resilience basically is just the ability or capacity to face challenges in an adaptive way so that we are able to maintain our functioning and stay healthy. So it's pretty simple, bounce back from adversity. And the way that you can think about the process of resilience is like a balance, like the scales of justice. And on the one hand are resources, and on the other hand are demands. And I will say for those of you who watched part 1 of Resilient Thinking, these first few slides that I'm going to go through, I'm just going to go through rather quickly so that we can build a foundation before we get into positive emotions. So it's not going to be too repetitive, but we do need to review just a bit. So the idea of this resource demands balance is that when we're feeling very resourceful, we are more likely to have high psychological well-being and engagement. But when demands become too heavy and outweigh our resources, we're headed for burnout and other kinds of psychological dysfunction. And demands are really anything that depletes us, anything that takes our energy. So things that are common in the legal profession are things like getting out of whack with work-life balance, work conflicts, interpersonal conflicts, those kinds of things. On the other side are all kinds of resources that we can focus on developing that are both individual and contextual. So our own strengths and abilities and talents help us be resilient. And the contextual things like the aspects of our work, our colleagues, whether we have effective leadership, all of these go into this process for resilience so that we can stay highly functioning with high well-being. And the resources that we're going to focus on today are emotional regulation and in particular positive emotions. And since resilience is basically the idea of being adaptive to stress, I want to just briefly, again, review what stress is, what the definition of stress is. And what stress is, stress all on its own isn't bad or good, it's generic. It just means that we're facing challenges and things that matter to us. It becomes distress when we perceive our work demands as being higher than our perceived ability to cope or our perceived resources. And when we feel like the demands are too high and that we don't have enough resources to cope, our brain responds differently. We have greater amygdala reactivity, and we actually perceive our world differently. We perceive the challenges as greater. So it's important for developing resilience to really think about developing our resources so that we perceive challenges as more within our ability to overcome. And the resource that we're going to be really focusing on today is positive emotions. And positive emotions really are a resilience resource. For one, what positive emotions do is help give us a break from the being psychologically activated under stressors. We get a little mental break. It also helps buffer against depression and anxiety. As I'm going to talk about in a little bit, it also helps us recover in a physical way when we're experiencing positive emotions, even under stress. So the challenge in helping to keep us in balance in our resilience framework, one of the challenges is this natural occurring negativity bias that we have. Due to our evolution, we are wired to pay more attention to negative emotions, and negative emotions have a bigger impact on us. So they feel more important and they stay with us longer. And for lawyers, this natural negativity bias can be exacerbated by all sort of the negativity storm that goes on in our everyday lives. And so especially for lawyers, given the negativity bias and the natural occurring negative stuff that occurs in our days, we may need to be even more mindful than others about making sure we mindfully create more positive emotions and experiences in our lives so that we can stay psychologically healthy. So the negativity bias is something that's wired into us. And essentially, it has such a big impact on us that bad is always stronger than good. And some estimate that it's about 3 times as strong as positive emotions. So what that means is to stay happy, healthy, and be able to function in an optimal way, we need to make sure that our positive emotions outweigh our negative ones. And so that's what we're really going to focus on today is what are the strategies that we can use as lawyers, that we can work into our everyday busy lives to make sure that we experience more positive emotions. And this is really important. Again, like positive emotions aren't just a dessert. What the research shows, piles of studies show that it's not just that we feel happy when we feel healthy. It's that happiness or frequent positive emotions actually make us healthier. So what the studies show is that people who have this positive emotional style of more frequently experiencing positive emotions have better psychological health. So less depression, less anxiety, and longevity. So we live longer, healthier lives, better immune functioning. All of these things that really matter to our health. And if you feel skeptical about this, like really positive emotions have this effect, there's one really famous study that I'd like to convey to you to see if it helps convince you. So in the 1920s, a mother superior asked her young nuns, they were about in their 20s, to write short autobiographical diary entries about their experience as being nuns. And then what the researchers did, they came back decades later to figure out who was still alive of those nuns that had written these little biographical statements. And some of the biographical statements were very matter of fact, just sort of day-to-day the things that they were doing. And other nuns' biographical statements used a lot of really energized, positive emotions about their experience as a nun. And what the researchers found decades later was the young nuns who used more of these positive, energized words were much more likely to still be alive. And so for those that were in the top quartile of using those positive emotion words, on average, they lived 7 years longer. So that's pretty striking, right? That positive emotions really does have this effect on our physiological response to stress. And in the nun study itself, the researchers, the study wasn't set up to identify why that was the case, but research in the decades following it have found that indeed, the experience of positive emotions has an effect on our immune system and our cardiovascular health, among other things that can keep us happy and healthy over a longer life. So those were the pretty amazing effects of positive emotional style. On the other hand is a negative emotional style, which is a tendency to feel more negative emotions than positive emotions. And this style has a detrimental effect on our psychological health. There's a much higher risk of depression and anxiety when we tend toward negative emotions. It also affects our performance, primarily because it affects our ability to interact effectively in an interpersonal way. People with a negative emotional style have a tendency to dampen positive emotions. And there's a very strong and consistent finding in the depression research that folks who start down the spiral of depression, this is one of the common findings, that they dampen positive emotions and they suppress their expression of positive emotions. And so what the researchers believe is that if we can help counteract that spiral by mindfully creating more positive emotions, we might be able to stop the spiral of depression. So that was sort of a summary of how positive and negative emotions affect our health. But I also want to emphasize that positive emotions also have an enormous impact on our ability to be successful as lawyers. So, all of us sort of understand that when we're successful, we're happy. But what the research also shows is that when we're happy, when we have this positive emotional style, we're more successful. So it's things like people like us better, so we get more support from others. There's more favorable performance reviews. All of these good effects were viewed as more effective leaders. And so when we are putting positive emotions out into the world, what's coming back to us is more positivity, which helps, of course, our psychological health. So again, this helps underscore that positive emotions, aren't just this side luxury, that they really play a big role in both our well-being and our ability to be successful. The research also shows that positive emotions, the frequent experience of positive emotions, is highly related to job satisfaction. What I have up here is just a summary of a study on job satisfaction for people who tend to experience more positive emotions than negative. And what the study did, it just simply asked working people how often they experienced the positive emotions in that little left column, calm, cheerful, content, and the like. And they subtracted that from the number of negative emotions that they felt, so things like annoyed, angry, anxious. And what they found was that the sum of this had a really strong relationship with job satisfaction. So I don't know if you know much about correlations, but they found that job satisfaction had a 0.73 correlation with this positive emotional style. And in social science standards, that's like mind-bogglingly large. So it, again, underscores that positive emotions have this enormous effect on our experience of our lives and our work. Boosting positive emotions, the way that we do that is through emotional regulation strategies. And to be successful in our jobs and in our lives, it's absolutely crucial that we're able to notice our emotions and be able to manage and respond to them in an effective way, and also be able to navigate the emotions of others. And what emotion regulation is pretty much just what it sounds like. It's our ability to manage and control our emotions, to either upregulate or downregulate our emotions in an adaptive way based on the situation. And so today what we're talking about is the upregulation of emotions, of using these strategies to bring more positive emotions into our days. So the rest of the presentation, I'm going to talk about just a number of different positive emotion strategies that you can use. And I wanted to give you a number of them, a collection that you might use, because we're all different, that not one strategy works for everyone. And for most people, using a variety of strategies is really the best way to go. But if we keep trying to use the same strategy over and over, the science suggests we actually get bored with it, and it doesn't have the same impact anymore. So we want to learn and try out a variety of strategies. And we also need to practice. This whole idea of resilient thinking and lawyer well-being is not a spectator sport. We really need to get involved. And one of the reasons this is true is because the way that our brains function, that we already have very sort of strong and concrete patterns of thinking built up in our brains. And in order to build up new patterns, it takes practice. So we can sort of have new grooves, or new neural pathways developed in our brains, so that in a particular situation, in a stressful situation, that we create habits where we automatically think about different ways that we can upregulate our positive emotions. So let's get to the first strategy. The first strategy to boost positive emotions is just the idea of prioritizing positivity, which sounds kind of funny, but what the research shows, probably not surprising at all, is that people who pay more attention to creating experiences in their lives that boost positive emotions are more likely to have higher well-being. They're happier and they're healthier. And oddly, what the research also shows that if you pursue happiness or positive emotions for their own sake, it actually backfires. So we can't will ourselves to be happy in any given moment. It doesn't work. So what prioritizing positivity is about is thinking up strategies that we can incorporate into our days that we know boost our positive emotions. So it's focusing on the journey, not the destination. That's the best way to boost positive emotions. And there was actually a study that was done, several studies now, on people that prioritize positivity. And what they found is that people who rank high on survey questions like a priority for me is experiencing happiness in everyday life have much lower depressive symptoms and much higher life satisfaction. And you might think about, what are the various things? Just make a list of the things that boost your positive emotions, and thinking of ways of scheduling them more into your busy day. And I would suggest that you favor high quality activities. So, what does this mean? Low quality activities are things like sitting and watching TV, or eating very sugary food that makes you happy in the moment, but doesn't really impact your long-term happiness. So there really are countless things, activities that we can do to boost our positive emotions. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that science shows are most helpful. So the next strategy is to spread your own positive emotions. And what I want to emphasize here is that our actions shape our environment. So our behaviors shape our environment, and then our environments shape us. So how we show up in our workplace is going to have a big impact on how other people respond to us. So we actually want to express positive emotions so that we can get other people experiencing positive emotions to create a better experience for all of us. So the first way to spread positive emotions is to project positive emotions yourself. So this is the idea of coming into a room and smiling or being energetic, those types of things. And why this is so important is because emotions are contagious. What the research shows is both positive and negative, but especially positive emotions quickly spread to those around us. And you've probably experienced that in your own lives, that if you come in upbeat, oftentimes those around you will quickly start mimicking your behavior. Where if your nose is in your phone, you seem like you have a cloud over your head, people are going to respond to you differently. And so we want to use that positive contagion to spread to other people. The other thing about spreading positive emotions is it affects how people view us. So people use emotions as information, often in a non-conscious way. So if you make them feel good, what their brain starts doing is liking you more, trusting you more, wanting to be friends with you so that you have a better, more effective interaction. So an example of this is a study in which callers, the researchers were calling people on the phone and asking them about life satisfaction. On a scale of 1 to 7, what's your life satisfaction? And what they found is that when people were in places where the weather was bad that day, their life satisfaction was rated lower than people who were in a sunny geography at that time. So this helps communicate this idea that emotions are information and we're not always aware of it, so we'll want to take advantage of it, is that we want people to respond to us in a positive way, and so we want to make them feel positively about us. Secondly is to instigate positive emotions. So in addition to smiling ourselves and being upbeat, we can instigate positive emotions by making other people feel good. And we'll be talking about some of these things, but there's simple things like acts of kindness, compliments, being responsive and attentive to people when we're interacting with them. All of these things help boost positive emotions so that people respond to us then in a more effective way. And that's what the research shows, that when if I'm coming into a room with a bunch of colleagues, I'm much more likely to have an effective interaction if I help instigate positive emotions in the room. People will see me as more influential, more likable, more effective in my leadership abilities. So again, in addition to boosting everyone's well-being, it also serves as this sort of social bonding lubricant where we're more likely to achieve our goals. But what I'm not suggesting is to fake positive emotions. What the research shows is that when we force positive emotions, when we fake it, it's actually related to burnout. And also it tends to not be effective because people are so good at detecting false emotions. So it's not going to have the effect that you want. It's probably going to backfire. So what I'm suggesting instead is to actually make positive emotions. And the little guy that's on your screen on the right there is my nephew, my baby nephew, helping to show us how to conjure up positive emotions. And I'm sure you've all done this already. Like when I grew up playing sports. And so there's an idea before I went into a game of sort of getting my mind on straight, kind of getting the game face on. That's the same sort of a thing when you're going into an interaction where you want to be effective and you want to help the well-being of others, that you just sort of take a mindful minute and get yourself actually into a positive state by taking a deep breath, thinking about how positive the meeting will go. Anything that kind of helps get you let go of whatever negativity you might be experiencing and getting into a positive emotion. And also keep in mind that our emotions follow our behavior. So it's not just, that when we feel good, we smile. What the research shows is that when we smile, it makes us feel good. It actually has the effect of boosting our emotions. So when we're thinking about trying to actually really create these positive emotions, smile. Act more happy and you're likely to feel happy. All right, so moving on to the next strategy. This is about spotting, savoring, and sharing positive emotions. So if you think about what happens most frequently during your busy day, probably charging through your day, going from one thing to the next, the negative stuff probably gets your attention, and the positive stuff probably doesn't. That's really most commonly what happens to us, is that we overlook positive emotions, which means we're not taking full advantage of this resource that can really help our well-being and functioning. And with respect to savoring, so savoring is the idea that we are really capitalizing, kind of squeezing out the positive emotions of every positive experience that we can have. And we savor by going over it in our head, thinking about the details, focusing on the positive aspects rather than the negative aspects, writing about it, reflecting on it, sharing with others. Any way that you can kind of upregulate the positive aspects of an experience is involved in savoring. And with respect to mental health, the failure to savor or dampening positive emotions is characteristic of depression. So there are savoring scales, one of which I've included in your materials that you can go through to see kind of how you are on this savoring ability or capacity. Folks who tend toward depression or are experiencing depression they rate very low on their savoring. And so what the research suggests is if we can be more mindful of the positive emotions and extend them out as much as we can, that's going to help our mental health. And savoring involves both anticipating the good things that are going to happen, being in the moment when they are happening, not thinking about other things, and then when it's over, looking back and reminiscing. And people have tendencies toward kind of their habits of savoring. If they're doing it all, they sort of tend to be in one of those buckets. And that's great. If you recognize in yourself that you're doing one more than the other, that's great, focus on that, but also think about how you can do more in one of the other areas. Like for me, and I think a lot of busy lawyers, I was horrible about anticipating the good stuff and really building up my positive anticipation for the event. So I was giving up an opportunity to squeeze out positive emotions and anticipation. I was just trying to get to the next thing. Quite good at reminiscing, but now I pay much more attention to trying to create time and space to also anticipate. And if you want to start practicing savoring more, I've included some things in the materials for you to get started. So one of the things is the scale that I mentioned where you can measure your current habits towards savoring. And also I included a scale to measure your positive and negative emotions. It's called the Spain scale. And there's a scoring key in it as well. And so what you can do is take the Spain scale now, and you can sort of see where you are on your frequency of positive emotions, and then track your progress. As you start to practice savoring and these other positive strategies that we're talking about, see if you can make progress toward increasing your positive emotion quotient. So one of the ways that we savor is to share our good experiences with other people, and that's called capitalizing. We capitalize on the event when we really think about it and we share it with others, and hopefully they help us savor it as well. And so there's research on responsiveness, how other people respond to our efforts to capitalize, to share our positive emotions. So in thinking about creating a good environment for your colleagues and your family, think about how you respond to their attempts to capitalize or savor their good emotions. And research suggests that there's different habits, there's different styles that people have of responding to other people's good emotions. So the first is, active destructive. It's the joy thief. Overtly negative, thinking of reasons why it's really going to be bad for you. Things like, oh, you got a promotion, but now it's just going to be more work for you. Things like that. So then there's passive destructive, which is conversation hijacker. So you might say, convey something good that happened to you, and they try to one-up you. and just start talking about their affairs and how good they are, and not really helping you to savor the good things that happen to you. And next is passive constructive, which is a conversation killer. So this is just like passively listening, maybe not looking at you, maybe looking at their phone, asking if there's still pizza in the kitchen, just not really responding to you in any way that makes you feel important and heard. And then the last style is active constructive responding. This is being a joy multiplier. This is helping people sort of re-experience the positive aspects of the good thing. So asking questions about, oh, how did that feel and what did you do next? And expressing enthusiasm. And what the studies on active constructive responding show is that it's, not surprisingly, only this last style, this active constructive or joy multiplier style, that really helps people boost people's positive emotions, as well as the quality of the relationship and the person's self of confidence and self-efficacy. So really think about when colleagues walk into your office and want to share good news, how is it that you're responding? And can you help create a better environment so more people can savor and take advantage of their good experiences? The next strategy is to expand your emotion vocabulary. So there's now a really large body of research that I think is pretty striking that shows naming our emotions helps regulate our emotions. Naming the emotion actually calms the amygdala activity. There's neuroscience research showing this. So it interrupts the experience, the negative experience, when we name the emotion. And what the research also shows is that the better we are able to differentiate our emotions, the better the effect, the better our ability to self-regulate our emotions. So low granularity would be, you can distinguish between pleasant and unpleasant, but not much outside of that. But really getting into the details of different kinds of pleasantness, different kinds of unpleasantness. And you can look online for now, like lists, many websites have lists and lists of both positive and negative emotions. So people can help people develop their ability to label emotions with higher granularity. And what this research also suggests is that if we learn more positive emotions, like really increase our granularity in the naming of positive emotions, we can increase our experience of positive emotions. So many of you have probably heard that Eskimos and others who are in really cold and snowy environments have many more words for snow than people who aren't in such cold environments. So one study showed that Eskimos have 50 words for snow. And what this underscores is that words create our world, that our brains create concepts. That's how we see the world. So we're not recreating experience. We don't have to relearn what a tree is. We don't have to relearn what all the objects are. We just have these concepts in our brain that we then scan for. And we're more likely to see it if we have a name for it. So what the researchers suggest is that we learn as many positive emotions as we can, and also that we start looking to words, positive words used in foreign languages that we might not be familiar with, because if we're able to identify it and name it, we're more likely to experience it. So in the materials, I've actually included a list of some positive emotions from foreign languages that might make you smile and hopefully help you experience different kinds of positive emotions. The next strategy, moving on, is pick and practice. I like this one a lot. This was based on a new study in which they asked the group of participants to practice 10 emotions. So they gave them 10 emotions over a 3-week period and asked them to practice a different emotion every other day. So they gave the definition of the emotion and a few different ideas for ways to practice it. And what they found at the end of the study is that the participants who engaged in this practicing of positive emotions had much lower symptoms of depression and much higher life satisfaction. And one of the reasons I love this study is because it's so simple that we can incorporate this into, no matter how busy we are, this is something that we can incorporate into our everyday experience. So the idea is just pick an emotion. And the emotions that are on the slide and in the materials are the ones that were actually used in the study. And the definitions are included in the materials as well. And you can also find definitions of positive emotions online. And then what you would do is just, over a several week period, pick a positive emotion that you're really going to focus on in practice. So think about, times that you've experienced gratitude or joy or interest. How is it that you bring those to life in your own life every day? And then think about how you can plan those more into your days. And the next strategy is specifically focused on gratitude. And gratitude was one of the positive emotions that was used in the pick and practice study. But I wanted to pull it out to focus on it individually because it is the positive emotions that has the most research behind it. Gratitude now it's been studied for years, and there's piles of research showing both its impact on psychological health, and also now there's newer studies showing its impact on physical health. So including all kinds of different physical maladies that are kind of related to exhaustion and cardiovascular issues, and also sleep quality. There was one study that found folks who engaged in a gratitude activity right before they went to sleep. So really thinking about what were all the good things that happened today? What am I grateful for in my life? Those folks had better sleep quality than the control condition that didn't do that. We're going to talk about sleep in a minute, but let me just emphasize here that sleep is absolutely essential for our psychological and our physical health. And there was a recent study that showed lawyers in particular were among the most sleep-deprived professions of the professions that were studied. So this is a potential strategy for you to both increase your positive emotions, physical health, and your sleep quality. So how might you do this? What are the different gratitude activities? They're described in more detail. Some of the activities, some of the possibilities are described in more detail in the materials, but let me briefly talk about a couple of them. So first is finding ways to express gratitude at work. There's research on gratitude at work showing that although many people really appreciate being thanked and showing thankfulness at work, people are least likely to express gratitude at work than any other domain. So there's just such an opportunity to increase everyone's well-being and functioning by finding ways to incorporate more gratitude at work. So think of things like, can you start a meeting? Can you start calls with everyone going around and talking about something that they're grateful for? Can you set up like a board or a jar or something where people drop in things for what they're grateful and then read them later? There's just countless ways that we could incorporate gratitude into our work lives that we're just not taking advantage of. There's also a lot of research on both gratitude journals and the gratitude letter exercise. So gratitude journals are just the idea that at night, you think of at least three things that you are grateful for today. It might be something that happened that day, or it might just be something that you're feeling good about in your life. And it tends to have the biggest impact, and people do vary, but it tends to have the biggest impact if you don't do it every day, because you can get bored with it and it can start feeling obligatory, but to do it once a week. So once a week, just take a moment to write it down, and it is important to write it down. That helps structure our attention and structure our experience. So just write down what it is that you're grateful for, what were the circumstances, why you're grateful for it. It doesn't have to be long, just a little paragraph. And multiple studies now have shown that this activity has a strong negative relationship with depressive symptoms, is related to life satisfaction and happiness, and all other sorts of good psychological and physical benefits. And last is the gratitude letter. And I've done this a number of times myself, and it's such a good experience. That you just think about someone in your life that you're really grateful for that maybe you haven't told them why. And so I've written gratitude letters to all 4 of my brothers. And it's just like what it sounds. You go ahead and you write the letter, and then if you can, convey it in person. Otherwise, convey it over phone. It's better than just emailing it, because it's part of the in-person experience that helps really raise the positive emotions, and read it to them. And this activity has been the subject of many studies now, and shows that it has a negative relationship with depressive symptoms, and a positive relationship with positive emotions for like weeks and months later. So this is a really powerful and effective activity that we can all do. Oh, and also as far as incorporating gratitude at work, I wanted to mention something that Biddle did. Biddle is a rather large law firm, and they're familiar with the research on gratitude. And what they did in this last year as part of their law firm's well-being initiative is they created these little cards. And what they asked the lawyers to do is just write on the card, hard copy, write on the card something that you're grateful for to somebody in the firm and send it to them. And I talked to the folks who were involved in creating the exercise, and they were worried. Lawyers can be skeptical and questioning of things like this. So they were a little concerned about how the lawyers would react. And they were so pleasantly surprised. What they found is that the lawyers really took to it. They had to reprint the cards like 2 or 3 times because it was such a great experience for people. So again, this is such an easy, low-cost thing that we can do to boost positive emotions in our work environment. All right, the next positive strategy is acts of kindness. This is another area where there's a lot of research in the area about the beneficial effects of doing acts of kindness for others. And there's many different studies that have been done. One of them, the one that I'm summarizing in this slide, was an individual activity where the instructions were just to be supportive and empathetic and helpful to somebody that you care about. Really that simple. And then as part of the study, they wrote it down, they reported what they did online, and they did this over a several-week period. And what they found was, big decrease in depressive symptoms and increase in life satisfaction. And again, there are many studies on acts of kindness, and what they show is that the person who, the people who are doing the good acts are the ones that really benefit the most from it. It raises our positive emotions, it decreases the feeling of stress and depression. And again, it's one of those things that's so easy to do. And in the materials, I included, a list of 40 things, simple things that you can do for your colleagues, your bosses, your clients, to engage in these kindness activities that will really boost everybody's positive emotions. And there was another study in acts of kindness that was more team-based, and I call it Yearround Secrets Santa because it was all done anonymously. So what they did was they just randomly chose a collection of people and assigned them to their colleagues and said, hey, here's your people that you're assigned to this week. Just do some nice stuff for them. Do some acts of kindness. So simple things like bringing them coffee from their favorite place, helping them when they need it, complimenting them. They're these small things. And what they found is that especially both givers and receivers received benefits, but the givers received really big benefits. Again, a decrease in depressive symptoms, increase in life and job satisfaction and happiness. And it had this amazing pay-it-forward effect. So again, this was anonymous. The people who were receiving the kind acts didn't know that they had been selected. But still what the researchers found is the receivers then also started engaging in more acts of kindness themselves, so increased their own acts of kindness by like 278%. So pretty whopping, right? And you can just see how this creates this upward spiral of creating a work culture that's much more supportive of well-being. So the next strategy is using your strength. And hopefully you've already heard about this strategy. It's one of those that's also gotten a lot of attention. And there's different ways that the studies have carried out this activity. There's all kinds of different strengths assessments that you can find. In the materials I mentioned the VIA strengths assessment, which is 24 character strengths. And there's many, many studies now that are using VIA. And what they find is that people who, you take the survey, you identify what your strengths are. So like, for example, my top strength is gratitude. Gratitude and love of learning are tied. So what I then do with this information is I think of ways that I can use them more and in new ways in my life. And I give all kinds of different possibilities in the materials of ways you might think about using your strengths. And what the research shows is people who do this, and it's using them in new ways. So it's not just identifying your strengths isn't enough. And just sort of using them in ways that you've already been using them isn't really enough either. It's figuring out how to use them more, but in new ways. And folks that have done this, engaged in the studies where they've asked people to do this activity, again, related to lower depressive symptoms, higher happiness, higher engagement, overall better physical and psychological health. The next happiness strategy is, they're all important, but I have to say this is probably among the most important. And it's the idea of connection and belonging. And piles and piles of research show that we have this fundamental need to have relationships in which people care for us and we care for them. And we also have a sense of belonging to groups that matter to us. And when you think about what happens when we get really busy at work, what's the first thing to go? Often it is our relationships. We stop seeing our friends, we stop seeing our family, and it ends up shooting us in the foot because it has this detrimental impact on our well-being when we give up those our connections and our involvement with our groups. And this was particularly concerning for lawyers. There was a study that just came out last year showing that, the study of loneliness, showing that of all the occupations studied, lawyers had the highest rate of loneliness. And loneliness is highly related to depression and other psychological health disorders. So this really matters for us, of really being more mindful about keeping our relationships in our lives, even when we get busy. And the sense of belonging, I also wanted to underscore, because I think we all get the high quality relationships are important to us. But the research on belonging is really pretty striking. What it has shown is that our sense of being connected to groups that we care about has a bigger impact on depression and loneliness than the number of relationships or number of friends that we have. So again, when we think about busy lawyers, what happens? Do we stay connected to our groups that matter to us? And this can be family, but it also can be clubs that we're involved in, hobbies that we belong to, even like the bar association. What multiple studies have shown is that the higher number of groups that we say that we identify with and that we belong to, the lower our rate of depression and loneliness. And it's not just a matter of, I can list 5 organizations that I belong to. It's truly being involved and engaged and identified so that it creates a sense of belonging with that group. That's what's important. And on the other side, when we have a lack of belonging, what the research shows is, again, highly related to depression and also functioning. There was a really interesting study, now it's been replicated many times, in the sense of belonging with college students. And what this study showed is that they had new college freshmen come in and do this really brief activity where they just read some material and watched a video of an older student saying, it's very common that when you first start college that you feel like you don't belong, you don't really fit in here, but it goes away. After a while, you feel a greater sense of fit and a much greater sense of belonging. And so This was all that they did. This was the brief activity. They then followed the students over the course of the rest of their studies at the school to see how they were doing with respect to performance in school, their GPA, and their health and well-being. And what they found at the end of the study is that minority students who engaged in this study, the performance gap in GPA had nearly been wiped out, and that they had better physical and psychological health than the minority students that did not engage in the activity. And for the non-minorities, the white students who were in the majority, it didn't hurt them, but it didn't have the same impact. And you can see why. That what the researchers found is that this brief activity changed the lens through which these students were seeing the world. So instead of interpreting some minor ambiguous interaction as communicating to them that they don't belong here, instead they were automatically reframing it to be, oh, everyone feels this way sometimes. And it had this enormous impact on their health and performance. So thinking about like how can we communicate those own messages within our organizations of belonging, you belong here, is really important to both health and happiness. So the next strategy is a broad one that includes a lot of things. So it's rest and recovery, which lawyers just don't do enough of. But the research is absolutely clear that we have to turn off our physiological stress response in order to stay psychologically healthy. If we stay activated, we have all of the stress hormones that keep us activated stay in our bloodstream. And this is then what causes the health issues. It's not just stress itself. Typically, if we're regulating our stress well, it goes up and down and we don't have any problems. But if we always stay engaged in work, if we always stay activated and feeling stressed out, we're much more likely to end up unhealthy. And so as far as like rest and recovery, what are the best things to do? There's a few things. One is the idea of psychological detachment, which can involve about any activity. But the idea is that we have to turn off our preoccupation with our work, at least for a while. When your brain just keeps going over and over and continuing feeling stressed about work, your body's going to continue to be exposed to the negative stress response. So one, sort of not surprisingly, one strategy that has been found to work is meditation. That meditation helps relieve our preoccupation with work to improve our health. Relaxation can also involve a lot of different things. The main goal of relaxation is to turn down that physiological stress response. So it can include things like listening to music, getting a massage is very healthy. Whatever you can do to turn it down. And also mastery activities. So things like playing sports and physical activity are really important. And for lawyers who tend to be very cognitively engaged, their work involves a lot of intellectual power. What the research suggests is that physical activity is likely the most beneficial activity for rest and recovery. What the research suggests is that when we do something passive or inactive, like watching TV, it actually makes us feel more tired. So thinking about how can we get active in a way that builds our sense of mastery. And of course, sleep. I mentioned earlier that there was a study suggesting that lawyers were among the most sleep-deprived of the professions, and this is just horrible impact on both our health and our psychological functioning. That sleep deprivation harms our ability it harms our executive functioning. So everything involved in problem solving, planning, thinking is affected by lack of sleep. And like, for example, if you go sleep deprived for just 2 days, you're functioning at a level that is as if you're intoxicated. That's how impaired we are. But the reason why more isn't done about it is because we don't realize that we are. We don't realize that we're impaired, but plenty of studies show that we really are. So really think about how can we get more sleep, relaxation, and find activities in which we're able to detach. And the next strategy I just referenced is meditation. This is one of the strategies that I'm sure everyone has heard a lot about, and so I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it, just to say, really try it. Both mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation have been shown to both decrease our stress response, our negative emotions, and also boost our positive emotions. And I think mindfulness meditation is one of those that most people are familiar with. It's sort of like focusing on your breath and refocusing your attention when your thoughts begin to wander. Loving kindness meditation is a little different. You're actually focusing on others and wishing them health, wishing them wellness. And you can find loving kindness exercises in apps and online. And loving kindness meditation in particular has been shown to really have a powerful impact on positive emotions. So the next is physical activity. I really can't emphasize enough how important physical activity is. Our body and our mind are very closely intertwined in ways that I think lawyers too often ignore because we're so focused on our bodies are just sort of the pedestal for our heads that we think about. But our physical health has an enormous impact on our psychological health. And there's research suggesting that physical activity is as effective or more effective at preventing and treating depression as depression medication. And more doctors are now actually prescribing physical activity and exercise as a mental health booster. So really think about how can we get more physical activity into our days. And the research suggests like how much. It doesn't necessarily have to be every day, which you might feel like that's overwhelming for you to change your lifestyle that much. But how can you raise your heart rate at least 3 days a week? That alone is likely to have a really great positive impact on your psychological health. And while you're doing physical activity, if you can get outside, there's now a growing body of research showing that if we get outside, especially in green spaces, seeing green grass and seeing green leaves, boosts our positive emotions, raises our psychological health, and also important for lawyers, it helps restore concentration. So if you're feeling, exhausted and sort of drained from what you're working on, try to get outside, try to get in green spaces. The research shows that it really has a big impact. And these are my two nieces sitting at home in Des Moines, Iowa on a pretty summer day, just helping to remind us to get outside. So last is goal progress. So goal progress is enormously important to psychological health. That when we feel that we're continually making progress on goals that matter to us and aligned with our values, this is highly related to mental health. And the converse is true. When we're not aligning our lives with our values and when we're not making progress on our goals, we're much more likely to sink into depression. So simple goal setting activities, set goals, track your goals, engage other people in your goal progress to help make sure that you continue to make progress. And also think about like your life areas that maybe are getting overlooked or ignored in your busy life as a lawyer. And in the materials I provided like a list of various life values that we have. So things like family and friends and recreation, mastery activities, devoting time to our communities, all of these things that can help raise positive emotions and also align our lives better with our values. Just give some thought about how important are each of those areas and how are you doing now? How is your satisfaction in those different areas of your life? And then really think about making some efforts and concrete strategies toward doing a little bit better at increasing your satisfaction in the areas outside of work. The research suggests that it would be really worth it. It has a big impact on our psychological health. So that is all the strategies, and I realize I went through many of them pretty quickly, but do take a look at the materials. They go through the activities in a lot more detail. And do try them out. Like I said, happiness and well-being really, it's not a spectator sport. You really need to get involved in it and track your progress on how you're doing at regulating your emotions and increasing your positive emotions. And I just want to leave you with this quote that I think resonates with a lot of lawyers. It just reminds us that when we take time to replenish our spirits, it makes us better able to serve others. So self-care isn't selfish. We really need to take care of ourselves so that we can best care for others. So that's the end of part 2 of Resilient Thinking. I want to thank you on behalf of myself and Lawyer Mutual Insurance Company for participating in this session. I hope you found it helpful.